Hey everybody, this is Dr. Holcomb. This is first of what will probably be two videos on revision and the portfolio. We're coming to the end of the semester, and the big culminating project for this course is the portfolio. And I want to spend some time talking about that portfolio and one of its major components, which is revision. That's probably the biggest expectation about the portfolio. What I'm going to be looking at is how much you have revised your drafts as you've transformed them into final papers. And I'm going to go over 4 topics, including revision in English 101 and 102 in general, levels of revision, responding to my comments, that is how to respond to my comments, and the contents of the portfolio. So let me just pause for a second and we'll get started. Okay, I'm back. I'm having a heck of a time with this video. For some reason, I think I'm on like take 6 or 7. So if there's a few little stutter steps, I think I'm just going to be cautious and pause rather than, well, start using colorful language just before I stop and throw what I just did away. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the first one, revision in English 101 and 102 in general. Revision is the centerpiece of the writing pedagogy in all sections of English 101 and English 102. Students draft a paper, they get feedback from their peers and their instructors, and then they revise their papers based on that feedback and turn everything in at the end of the semester under a single cover, which is the portfolio. A couple years ago, a buddy of mine from computer science, we were curious, like what kinds of revisions are students typically doing in a given section of English 101 and 102. The challenge that we encountered was the volume of texts that are produced, or that is produced, across all sections of English 101 and 102. We run about 130 sections, and each section has about 24 students, and each of those students produce anywhere from 3 to 4 papers. And when you add that all up, that's anywhere from 9,000 to 12,000 first and final drafts every semester that are produced in English 101 and 102. So how do we know what's happening between all those first and final revisions? Towards answering that question, we just start developing software that allows us to take a bunch of text, a bunch of first and final drafts, dump it into the algorithm, run the algorithm, and then get a snapshot view of what is happening in terms of how often students are revising, what kinds of revisions they're making, and where in their papers they typically make those changes. So let's take a look at one piece of output from that algorithm. This is let me get up here. This is a chart representing revisions and a large selection of English 101 and 102 papers. And the big conclusion here is that students aren't revising as much as we'd like them to. The long bar at the top, this represents the number of sentences that survive unchanged from a first draft to a final draft. That is around 63-64% of those sentences, there's no changes made to them. Down at the bottom here, this bar represents the number of sentences that were deleted from a first draft into a final draft, and that's about 21%. When we looked at the drafts, we have the same number of unchanged sentences, which is nearly 64%, and then we have about 26% of the sentences are just insertions. So there is some revision going on. This is kind of a good news, bad news thing. There is some revision going on, and it's and it's primarily happening at the level of the sentence, which suggests to us that these revisions are substantive. But what's missing, and that's represented by all these little tiny bars, are editing and proofreading. That when students revise, they're ignoring a lot of this, a lot of the sort of surface and local errors or issues, and just adding and subtracting text by way of sentences. So what I would like for you to think about as you revise your papers is to, focus on substantive revisions. That's a big part of it, but don't ignore your own language and think about how you can improve it. So towards that end, let's talk about different levels of revision. Toward that end, let's go back to the Prezi. Okay, next slide. Okay, when scholars in composition and rhetoric, or teachers of composition and rhetoric, talk about revision, they often talk about it at two levels. Local revisions, these are revisions at the level of the word, the phrase, and the clause, and then global revisions. Here's an example of a draft from a student paper, a 102 paper. The student wrote, "Nuclear power is a very, very dangerous thing, but it produces really good clean energy. Take the 2011 Japanese nuclear disaster. 3 of the 6 nuclear reactors actually had a meltdown." Now you probably, if you look at, picked up on some of the surface errors. You've got a typo here, dangerous, and that needs to be corrected. You also have a comma splice here. You have 2 clauses joined within the adequate punctuation or coordination. So I guess a way, you could put an and there, you could put a period there, you could put a semicolon. But there's a larger issue going on here at the level of style and on the level of how information is managed across these sentences. If you look again, the student in a sense is saying nuclear power is bad, some aspects are good, and then when we get here, introducing, the student's going to introduce an example, and the expectation is going to be an example of the good aspects of nuclear energy. But what we get here are the 6 nuclear reactors actually had a meltdown. So there's a little hiccup. There's some seesawing back and forth between bad and good. There's a hiccup here where it doesn't really frame this sentence as well. The student doesn't frame this sentence as well as he probably could have. So here is my suggested revision for this draft. Oops, come back here. Although nuclear power produces clean energy, it is a very, very dangerous thing. Take the 2011 Japanese nuclear disaster. 3 of 6 nuclear reactors actually had a meltdown. So what I think the problem here is that the student lacked the syntactic form that would best express his meaning. And the meaning here is that his overall point is that it's dangerous. Though he wanted to add some sort of qualification, like a good scholar, a good thinker does, add some sort of, acknowledging some, either an opposing view or some other complication. But he wants to subordinate that notion to, but what he needs to do is subordinate that notion to his main point, and that is about nuclear power being a very dangerous thing. So here's a syntactic form, or syntactic forms that seem to do the job more effectively. Move the qualification to the front of the sentence and put it in a subordinate clause. Although nuclear power produces clean energy, then you go to the main clause, which is the main point. It is a very, very dangerous thing. And that sets up this next sentence nicely, which is to introduce a negative example. Take the 2011 Japanese nuclear disaster, for instance. 3 of the 6 nuclear reactors had a meltdown. So I hope you can kind of see that this one flows a little bit better and does a better job of capturing what I think is the intent lying behind this rough draft. So these are the kinds of things that you need to think about as you're working through your drafts. Not only correcting errors, but also thinking about how you can make sentences or passages or sequences of sentences more effective rhetorically. Now let's talk about global revisions. Global revisions typically involve big ticket items, the big picture, and that includes things like the purpose, the overall purpose and focus of your paper, changing that if you think that is required. Organization or structural changes, moving large parts of your, or large passages around in your draft, or deleting them outright and adding new ones in. Argument and evidence, and that includes, is the trajectory of my argument, is there a clear trajectory to my argument, and am I supporting it with adequate reasons and evidence? Do I need to do more substantiation of claims? And then accommodating audience and situation, and this would be kind of another global concern. at the level of style? Are my choices working effectively to answer the expectations and the needs of my audience? And also, is it doing a good job of responding to the situation that prompted the writing, and that the writing hopes to influence in some way? Okay, let's go on to the next one. Responding to my comments. You've turned in your drafts, and then you've received comments from me through track changes. And I just want to spend a few minutes talking about how to work with those commented drafts. And let me go down, and I've got an example of, this is from a student in another course I taught. It was a one-on-one course, but it'll illustrate how to kind of work with my track changes. The old convention I used to use, if I had a kind of a comment about the substance or form of a passage, I would use square brackets and insert my comment and then close brackets. In your commented drafts, I shifted to using the track changes comment function, which just puts it over in the margin. So these things, I hope you consider, and as you're working through your paper, these are moments where I got confused, or I thought you could add some more text, or you could clarify text, or present text more effectively. And just while I'm here, you'll notice sometimes I'll offer a suggested revision, like this, a suggested rewrite. These are yours. I'm giving them to you. If you want to use them, feel free to use them verbatim. The rationale here is that there are many ways in which people learn how to write, but one of the ways in which they learn how to write is through imitation. So essentially, I'm giving you some text to imitate. You'll also note I do this a lot frequently in inline edits. Again, this is where I'm correcting grammar or unidiomatic expressions, or issues in diction. Again, this is yours to use. All I ask is that you consider these changes before you accept or reject them. This is your paper, and you have the final say on this stuff. So consider it. If you think, okay, well, this is a better revision, or this is a better alternate, then I'm going to use it. That's fine. If not, you're not bound to use it. Okay, and then the third component of my response to your paper is my end of the paper comment. Now here's where I typically make more global suggestions for revision. And I'll typically outline two or three big ticket items that you need to work on, or that I'm asking you to work on as you reconsider your paper for the final version. So here's where you'll find the more substantive things. And one other comment while I'm here, the ghost grade. I don't think I've mentioned how this thing functions in the course. The ghost grade is not recorded, and it will not influence your final grade. What it is to give you a sense of where your paper falls on a spectrum, from an A paper down to an F paper. And my expectation is that with performing the revisions, this grade will go up for your final version. But the revisions have to happen, and it's not just the number of revisions, it's also the quality of revisions. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop this video, because the next section is going to take longer than the 1 minute I have left. Okay, so stay tuned for part 2 of this video on portfolio and revision.